podcast, where we take you inside politics in Northern Ireland and inside policy making at Stormont. Joining me on the podcast today, we have our two regular former special advisors. We have Tim Kearns, who was former special advisor to First Minister Peter Robinson and head of policy for the DUP. Hello, Tim.
Hi, David.
And we also have Michael McKernan. He was a special advisor to the SDLP. He was in the executive from 2007 to 2016. Hello, Michael.
Hello, David. Hello, Tim.
On the podcast today, we are looking at the results of an integrated education survey conducted by the Education Authority, which shows that nearly a quarter of parents would not send their child to an integrated school. With just 8% of children being educated in integrated schools, we're asking, is the appetite for integrated education grossly overestimated? We're also going to be looking at Donald Trump's recent sights being set on the pharmaceutical industry in Ireland about trying to get jobs back to the United States. We're going to be asking about the risks to the Irish economy, and there is some risks of the Irish economy going bust. How true are they? All that and more coming up on this episode of Stormont Sources. Okay. You can watch the conversation on YouTube, search for Stormont Sources, where we upload clips and full episodes for you to enjoy. Head to YouTube, subscribe to our channel there for videos and updates. You can also follow us on X. You can watch our clips on TikTok, Instagram. Make sure you subscribe to our mailing list at stormontsources.com. Remember to leave us a review on your podcast app, although if it is anything less than 4 stars, please don't bother. In the meantime, you can get in touch with us also on WhatsApp, 0333 404 6507. Just remember to use the word Stormont so that we can. I'm just going to do that all again. Sorry. You can watch the conversation on YouTube. Search for Stormont Sources, where we upload clips and full episodes for you to enjoy. You can head over to YouTube, hit the subscribe button whilst you're there. You can follow us on X and TikTok and on Instagram. Make sure you subscribe to our mailing list at stormontsources.com. Remember to leave us a review on your podcast app. And thank you to those of you who have done so. If it's less than 4 stars, please don't bother. You can also send us a WhatsApp, 0333 404 6507. Remember to use the word Stormont so we know it's for this podcast. You can also send us an email, hello@stormontsources.com. We read all of your messages and all of your comments, and thank you to those of you who are getting in touch with us. We really, really, really appreciate your questions and your comments. Before we get into the podcast, we thought we would take these summer months, another week in these summer months, to go through another listener question. So this one is from Jason. Jason says, hello, I'm a young person studying politics in school, and your podcasts have been a great listen to and have really helped me understand Northern Ireland politics better. Thanks very much for that, Jason. I just wanted to ask a quick question. The Belfast Telegraph released an article where they revealed that Reform UK sent an email to all 1,000 of its members in Northern Ireland asking if members were willing to help set up branches and if they could stand candidates in Northern Ireland elections. So with the Reform Surge in the rest of the UK, do you guys think that they would have any success here in Northern Ireland? Tim, I'll start with you here. Now, it is worth noting that they have attempted a link with the TUV last year at the Westminster election, and that was patchy, to say the least. What do you make of the potential for Reform standing in 2027 in Northern Ireland?
Well, first off, if Jason's in sixth form, by the time he's listening to this on Thursday, we're recording Wednesday, but on Thursday he'll maybe have his A-level results. So I hope our podcast did not diminish his A-level results in any way, and that everybody getting their results today has done well in politics, and particularly if you listen to Stormont Sources and use any of the examples that we have. But the national parties over the last recent history anyway of Northern Ireland politics have not tended to do terribly well. The last time I could think of anyone breaking in any way that you could say was significant was back in the by-election to replace Jim Kilfeder when he passed away in 1991, and Lawrence Kennedy, who was standing for the Conservatives at that point in time. Now, he didn't come very close to winning, but it was certainly he was certainly within touching distance of the seat. And I think there was a lot of optimism at that time when the general election came around in 1992 that the Conservatives could maybe make a push in North Down and maybe you could see a Conservative returned. That didn't happen for a number of reasons, amongst which, Lawrence Kennedy left Northern Ireland and stepped down from politics following his foray in the by-election, and the Conservative Party just completely evaporated in Northern Ireland thereafter and have had no success. we've seen sort of other Nigel Farage parties. They've come to Northern Ireland and then they've gone. UKIP didn't exactly pull up any trees. But here's the thing. If you look back and you track UKIP, particularly at Westminster elections, it's not so much that UKIP really pushed to win any seats or were any significant force, but their votes were coming from sort of the right of unionism, so from the DUP, from the TUV type end of unionism, and they maybe prevented unionists from winning seats. So if they were to stand the next Westminster election, I think the danger would be not so much that they would poll 20% in Northern Ireland. I don't see that happening. But in places like East Londonderry, would Gregory Campbell win the seat if 1,000 votes, 1,500 votes, 2,000 votes went to Reform? Where are they going to come from? They're going to come from the DUP and the TUV, you would suspect. I can't imagine there's terribly many nationalists who are going to vote for the Reform type politics, although we maybe see immigration being more.
Michael's going to tell us he's on their mailing list next because he's been to anti-protocol rallies and he's
one of the 1,000 people. He's been on there. He's on the mailing list. So I don't see it breaking in any significant way, really, to answer Jason's question directly.
Okay, Michael, what do you think? Reform? I mean, we haven't had a great history of parties from the rest of the UK standing here in Northern Ireland.
Yes, well, naturally, if they have a major conference here in Northern Ireland, I do my best to attend it. But I agree with Tim's analysis. The history of the major parties in GB getting off the ground here electorally is very limited indeed. There's always been an independent streak in North Down. Tim mentioned Jim Kilfetter and Lawrence Kennedy and so on. But I don't think so. Having said that, they aligned themselves with TUV, except for North Antrim, where they backed Ian Paisley Jr., so they didn't have an undue influence on things in North Antrim in the last election. But I could see if they swept the boards in GB, which is a possibility. I mean, Nigel Farage is the bookies' favourite to be the next Prime Minister. If they swept the boards and unionists looking across the water said, well, maybe these are the people we need to be tying up with a bit more, and say Jim Allister actually merged TUV into Reform and it became Reform Northern Ireland with Jim Allister, it maybe could become a force. But that's a lot of ifs, a lot of buts.
Yeah.
I think overall it's very unlikely, and I can't see them making any major breakthrough. They might find some charismatic character who appeals to some unionist voters in a particular locality, but overall I can't see it.
Yeah. I think one of the issues is that Reform is essentially an English nationalist party. It's not a pan-unionist party, and I think that is a big issue for many unionist voters here.
They're polling significantly in Scotland and polling significantly in Wales. I mean, they're not going to win in Scotland, but they are going to win MSPs, largely from the Conservatives. They are going to take seats in Wales. I think they're going to do very well in Wales, and they're certainly going to win 7, 8, 9 seats in Scotland. So, to say they're an English nationalist party, sure, that's maybe what they are at their core, but they are attracting votes in other parts of the UK.
But the most likely outcome overall is the further fragmentation of the unionist vote in Northern Ireland. And Tim, of course, highlighted that as a danger, whereas I would regard it as maybe not a bad thing.
And by the way, there have been some comments in Reform within, I know Nigel Farage has made comments about Irish unity, which would be problematic for any pro-union voters in Northern Ireland as well. So look, we'll wait and see. We'll watch this space. I mean, look at an assembly election, I suppose, the more the merrier in an STV system. It makes it all the more interesting. But Jason, thank you very much for your question. And again, to anyone listening, please do send in yours and we will do our best to get to them and answer them. Okay, into the podcast proper. So we've got our first topic today, which is on the topic of integrated education. Now, we have talked about this in the past. We had Kelly Armstrong, the author of the Integrated Education Bill, on the pod before. But a survey came out in July. This survey was authored by the Department of Education, and it surveyed 9,700 respondents, so actually quite a large sample size of people. And it found that 24% of those surveyed in there would prefer, 24% of the people surveyed in there would prefer their child not to be at an integrated school. That compares to 31.2% who said they would, and 37.3% said that they didn't mind. Now, again, this is being conducted by the Department of Education, who have to go out and survey attitudes toward integrated education within Northern Ireland. And again, the survey, and we'll unpick some of the further data within it in a wee bit, but just those top line figures. I mean, Michael, you are a resident champion of integrated education. I mean, 25%, just under, saying that they wouldn't. That must be a bit disappointing, no?
Yeah, but first let me say, yes, I am involved in the integrated education movement. So anything I say here, I'm speaking in an entirely personal capacity and not for any of the organisations that I'm connected with.
Fair enough.
It's a ludicrous survey. And everybody, including Robbie Meredith on the Beeb and Belfast Telegraph and all the rest of them, and you, David, leading off on this stat that 24% of people would prefer to send their children to schools that aren't integrated. Well, what is the news there? At the moment, 92% of pupils don't go to integrated education. So, what is the relevance of that stat? But the fact remains, in survey after survey after survey, by whatever methodology you like, there's a majority of people, given the opportunity, would take up integrated education. And of course, why wouldn't they? It's a much better form of education than segregated education. And people who are opposed to integrated education need to get their heads around this fact that it is a quirk of history that our children are segregated in our schools. They're not segregated in FE colleges. They're not segregated in university. We don't segregate patients at hospital, not even in the children's hospital. Segregated by religion is a ludicrous thing to do to young people. And if we were starting again, we wouldn't do it. So it was a quirk of history that we've arrived at this point. And those of us who favour integrated education, we're not imposing it. I mean, if that stat was right and 24% of people don't want to send their children to an integrated school, well, I wouldn't try to impose it on them. But I'd be chasing after the other 76%. And at the moment, integrated education is only 8% of pupils. So there's a long way to go, an awful lot of headroom, and we need to go at it. And with Kelly's bill now in force, the department has much more of an obligation, not just a moral obligation, but now a statutory obligation to promote and support integrated education. And they ought to get on with it. Now, I could criticise this actual survey in the detail of it, in among the weeds. I'm not sure listeners to Stormont Sources want me to critique the methodology, the people who were asked, how they were asked, the way the data was collated and presented, etc., etc. Lots of problems with it, but I'm not going into that right now.
Sure. And we'll unpack some of the further data within there. But again, Michael gave the response that I kind of expected him to give. Yes. But Tim, but Tim, and we'll get into that. But Tim, your initial thoughts to the survey.
Well, it's interesting what Michael says. He's quite right, and I've brought this up with some of the organisations that Michael works with in the past, and you're absolutely right. Survey after survey says 70%, 2/3, 72%. It's in that sort of 65 to 75% range of parents on surveys say they want integrated education. And I've consistently said to the people in the integrated education sector, well, that depends on the question that you ask. If you say to someone, do you agree with integrated education, yes or no? Well, you're not going to say no to that, because as Michael says, we have a quirk of fate. We have, an education system where Protestant schools handed over their estate and Catholic schools didn't. And so it's very difficult to bring all the sectors together, and we're at where we're at, and we wouldn't be here for starting an education system today. All of that's true. And people are really just reflecting that when they say, yes, I agree with integrated education. That's merely what they're saying. But I've said this to integrated educationalists time and time again, and it doesn't have any cut through with them, and maybe this survey will, because this survey says, do you prefer quality education, the best school that your child can go to, or an integrated school? And
well, if ever there's a loaded question, what a ridiculous question
sure,
that is.
Sure, okay.
With the built-in suggestion that an integrated school is not a good school.
But the point is, if the integrated school is the best school in your area, the parents are going to send their school to the integrated school. If the voluntary grammar school's the best school in a child's area, you're going to send the kid to that school. I mean, I think that's the point. parents, if integrated schools, so if every single school tomorrow converted to be an integrated school, parents would still send their kid to the best school in the area in which they live. That is what is most important. So, instead of getting fixated on schools being integrated or not, I think what we need to be fixated on is our education system being the best that it can be, not just voluntary grammars, not just controlled grammars, not just integrated schools, not just Catholic secondary schools, but those schools that are failing, particularly controlled secondary schools, which is a sector that is not attaining the results that it should attain. I think that's really where we should be putting the force of our resources into, to ensure that every kid goes to a good school.
But it's not either or. Of course, you want schools to be as good as they can be, and at the moment it's a whole different discussion, but it's an equally important one. Is the two-tier system of education that we have, where middle class students tend to go to the grammar schools, not exclusively, but generally, and working class go to the secondary schools, non-grammar schools. That is deeply unfair. That affects pupils' outcomes for the rest of their lives. So yes, you're dead right, Tim. We want to improve schools right across the piece. But my issue around integrated education is simply, why are we educating children apart? Why? It's not normal. And an awful lot of the supporters of integrated education, the high-profile supporters, are people from Northern Ireland who go abroad, or they go to England, or they go to America, or they go somewhere, and they look back across at us and they think, what on earth are we doing that for? Why don't we put a stop to it? And there's bucket loads of situations that have been identified by academics where it would be a simple change to merge two schools, state school, controlled school, and Catholic school, and have the one integrated school, where it would suit the convenience of the pupils and the parents, rather than some of these ridiculous mergers that people embark upon to avoid integrating schools. I mean, there are people out there who should be looking after the interests of pupils and parents, and they are engineering educational rearrangements that are not in the interest of pupils and parents to avoid integration, and that is ridiculous.
But you were talking there, Michael, and you were raising the issue there about quality of education. I mean, the problem I think with people who advocate for integrated education have in this debate is that is not equal. That is not as equally applied across all the sectors. I think the issue in controlled schools versus the Catholic sector, even non-Catholic grammars, that is not. I mean, we could talk about perception. The perception within the Catholic community, the perception within the Catholic sector, anyway, is that results there do tend to be good, whether they're grammar or non-grammar. They do tend to be better than those in controlled sector, and that probably explains why the Catholic sector has not bought into integrated education in any meaningful way at all in the last 40 years.
I don't think that's the reason at all. I just think it's about exercising power and control over your community by the church. And it so happens, yes, that the Catholic schools, particularly the Catholic grammar schools, do very well academically. But that's not the real issue. Like, for example, you get... the whole underlying policy here for area planning by the department is that schools should be sustainable. They should be able to offer the full curriculum. They should have a certain size of role in the school. And many are unsustainable. So in rearranging that estate, in Catholic schools where there's an issue around sustainability, what they do is merge maybe 3 schools in 3 different towns to become one school. But it means that the parents and the pupils are now having to travel to a different town for their education, rather than merge with the equally challenged controlled school in the same town and come together as one integrated college. And Queen's University, the University of Ulster, did research that quickly identified 30 locations where there's 2 schools, cheek by jowl, challenged in terms of the government's sustainability policy, and where the obvious solution is a merger into an integrated one. And it has yet to happen, sponsored by the EA.
But, I mean, Tim, is it not the issue, though? One of the issues with this is that we do talk about the sustainability of the school estate, and yep, their education budgets are under pressure, but, merging schools together, and people in the integrated sector have been challenged on this about that doesn't necessarily save you money, because you can't just what about the school buildings? You're going to need new school builds in many places. It doesn't necessarily achieve the savings that many people say.
No, quite the opposite. There are efficiency gains to be had in merging.
But how though?
because you're reducing the number of schools and you're making the,
but how does that save money, Michael?
It doesn't have to always be a new build.
Confused. Yeah.
It doesn't
but I'm
always
confused
have
how
to
that
be a
saves
new
money
build.
because if you know there's pupil to teacher ratios, the biggest cost is staff. You merge two schools together, you're not reducing the staff. You're not reducing that cost.
Yes, you are. One
No, you're
headmaster,
not.
one headmistress,
You're
not
not.
two. Of course, you're reducing the staff.
Well. So you're not going to make a 20% cut.
You've just put your finger on possibly the biggest efficiency gain. I mean, how can duplication?
That is a fallacy.
How can duplication of small, unsustainable schools right across the piece? How can that be economically efficient?
That's a fallacy. So let's take two primary schools. So we've got 7 teachers in primary school A. No, we've got 7 teachers in primary school A, 7 teachers in primary school B. Those schools come together. You're still going to need almost all of those teachers to stay. You will lose some teachers really through retirement.
Why will you need them all?
Why
will you need them all?
Because there are ratios, Michael. You can't just combine. Like if you've got if you've got 2 years that are coming together, you're going to need to employ the same number of teachers.
But these are schools that are failing the sustainability standards and have very small roles. So there's 7 teachers in each teaching very small classes. Once you join them up, you just need the same 7 teachers with larger classes. I mean, you're on totally the wrong side of this argument.
No,
there's massive efficiency gains to be had.
Because the number one thing, the number one reason why those schools are failing is because parents are prepared to drive past those schools so as they don't have mixed classes. So where P3 and P4 are taught together, P6 and P7 are taught together. Parents will say, well, I'll drive past that so that I can get a school where my child is in a P7 class on their own, a P5 class on their own. That's what parents want. So that's what inequality of education. So when you bring these two schools together, it's not a simple matter of we get rid of 7 teachers and we keep the 7 teachers and run the school with them. No, you're going to have to keep at least 4 or 5 teachers from the other school and the 7 teachers. It's about 13 teachers. You've lost 2 teachers who probably would have been retiring anyway in the next year. So you've saved nothing. So can I just unpack the survey just a little bit more, just to give listeners a bit more context about what we're talking about, because it didn't just ask, are you in favor of integrated education? It did go a little bit deeper than that. So they actually dug into those people who kind of favoured integrated education as their first preference. So 32.5% of that said the quality of education was the most important factor. This was followed then by proximity to home. That was just under 15%. And wanting integrated education was under 13%. I mean, but just to put it back to Michael, and I will appreciate that it is 2 against 1 on this, by the way. Now Michael knows how I feel every week.
But sock it to us, Michael. So is that not a bit damning for the sector that even for those that actually favour integrated education, it's under 13% of people are saying that's the priority? Why are we wrong on that? Why are we wrong?
Yes, you're completely wrong.
Go ahead. Why?
Integrated education currently accounts for 8% of pupils out of the total in Northern Ireland. Integrated education is not available in many areas in Northern Ireland, so it's not an option of your options to choose. So when people are asked what matters most, they're not thinking, what matters most is my integrated school, because there may not be one in the area. And of course, all parents will think quality of education is the most important thing anyway. It's this ridiculous thing that is put against integrated education that if it doesn't tick every box or answer every social problem, then it's not a good thing. It's like saying we shouldn't have good preventative health care because we haven't found a cure for cancer. It's under attack by people who don't really understand that the basic dynamic is the state now needs to get behind integrated education and get that 8% up to 20, 30, 40%. Doesn't have to get to 100, doesn't have to get to 90, but it's time to move it on. And there's nothing in that survey that undermines that or contradicts that. And there are many other surveys. And this survey, anyway, has been challenged by some of the organisations in the sector.
And I think Michael's showing us a little bit is there is this, I don't know what the right word is. I mean, zealousness, this, purity within the integrated system. It's our way or the highway. You do it the way we want it to be done. Integration has to happen the way we did it, because in the 1970s, we marched up the hill to Lagan College and we took the pain and we did this. So you do it our way or it's not integrated education at all.
No.
There's so many schools that are integrated, that are thriving, in their integrated status. They're just not officially integrated, but they have actually a better mix and a much wider mix than many schools that have the integrated stamp on them, but they're not treated as integrated. They're not treated as orthodox because they're outside of the canon of what integrated education says integrated education should look like. You've got to drop your orthodoxy. You've got to stop being a zealot, and you've got to start looking at what's on the ground and saying there's lots of schools out there that are integrated and doing a great job at integration without the integrated sector touching them.
But Michael, the interesting, because this has been actually, I know Paul Given has actually talked about, he wants to change the name of controlled schools to community schools, because he thinks that's a better description. But just on, just because obviously, Michael, we both come from pro-Irish Unity perspectives, and this is a real issue within, particularly, I think, more within the kind of the nationalist community on this, because the resistance is actually more from that. So why is it that parents in the main do have that? I'll call it a percent, because I don't want to impugn any integrated school. You're right, Michael. There are some very good integrated schools out there doing really good work. We mentioned Lagan College, one of the best schools in Northern Ireland, no question about that. But there are also some really good Catholic schools as well, and the ethos, the Catholic ethos, is something that is given credit to. I mean, in my school, I know that is something that mattered to my parents in making the decision for me, and I know it has mattered to other of my friends who've had kids as well. It's mattered to them, and they have sent their kids to those schools because of the quality of education.
We could have a separate discussion on what exactly the Catholic ethos is that brings such benefits. But here's my point: if Catholic parents want to send their children to Catholic schools, and because they're better, and they don't want to send them to integrated schools for whatever reason, that's fine. That's fine. And the same on the Protestant side, or the controlled side. But where they do want to do it, the state now has to provide it. So the battleground is how you measure the demand. And that's the opening salvo from the government with a DUP minister who doesn't like integrated education. And that's the opening shot on saying what demand is. So if 24% are against ever sending their children to integrated education, I can live with that. That's not a problem. But let's get this 8% up to where it ought to be. And that's what the minister should be focusing on. And Tim's thing about zeal and self-righteousness and all, that's a lot of baloney. Again, a bit like shared education, it's another thing wheeled out to undermine integrated education, that schools are already integrated. You're not integrated already if your board of governors is all from one side of the community, no matter what school that is. So you won't be, there is an integrated ethos.
Well, that's our invite to the opening of the Struel campus down the Swanee, Michael. Thanks very much for that.
An abomination. An abomination. I'd like to see. I mean, I'm happy for the schools in Omagh to get new schools, and the money's been put aside for that. So, well done, executive. But bringing them all together and keeping them as separate entities, separate uniforms, is actually bringing the division cheek by jowl. It's an abomination. It shouldn't get built.
Okay. Just on ethos, something I was actually surprised at in the survey was just how low ethos ranked. Now, I don't know if that's just people's not understanding what ethos is, because in education, ethos is probably the most important determiner of a school's success. So the ethos that's set by the Board of Governors, by the principal, by whatever is the underpinning philosophy that the school has. And it was only 10.4%, so 36.6% of people who weren't going to an integrated school said quality of education was the most important thing, and only 10.4% said that ethos was the most important thing. And I think what we see, and David's touched on this, and this is undoubtedly true, Catholic schools, wherever they are in the world, and this is not just a Northern Ireland thing, this is in England, this is in Canada, this is in Australia, this is worldwide, Catholic teaching ethos creates a higher quality of education than any other ethos within the Western world in terms of how a school is structured, how a school teaches kids, and then success coming out the other end. And I wonder in Northern Ireland, would we be better looking at what it is about that Catholic ethos, and this isn't just a Northern Ireland thing. This is worldwide, North, South, Canada, Australia, the whole of the world. The Catholic ethos is something that underpins a school that leads to success. Now, we don't have time to tease that out today, but I think we'd be better looking at that and saying, how can we make our schools better by tapping into that rather than trying to create some artificial integrated status?
Mike Nesbitt actually said as much some time ago. He said, if this Catholic ethos is so good, why can't we all have it? And I wouldn't argue with that.
Exactly.
Well,
I mean, I agree.
But I spent an hour with Bishop Donald McKernan discussing that very subject. What is the Catholic ethos, and what is this additional benefit that accrues to children when they're in a Catholic school? And I didn't get a terrible lot out of him. There was a thing about having a universal approach to things, and maybe having a greater generosity to the wider world than a more narrow focus might produce. But that was nearly the height of what he told me in about an hour's discussion.
Well, look, I mean, I think it is one of these things. So, I mean, the fundamental critique I do have of the pro-integrated position is that I think, look, 70% will say that. But see, when it comes down to, I mean, Michael, you touched upon bringing schools together, i.e. closing schools down, and I think that support would absolutely plummet. When it comes to the school down the road, the school over there, I just think realistically, it's the same thing with healthcare reform. It's not just in this area, by the way, it's a whole host of areas. No, I think when the rubber starts hitting the road of schools closing,
no, David, listen,
that's where if
you get a village, and let's say it's 5 miles away from anywhere else, a village, and there's two little schools, a Protestant one, Catholic one, and they're both failing, they're both not getting the role, blah, 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 blah. The obvious first choice of area planning option would be, could we merge them maybe as an integrated school? That is never the result of area planning. So what happens instead? They both close, and the parents now have to drive the little ones at least 5 miles away to somewhere else, and the kids are disrupted from somewhere they could probably walk to before they close. That's the reality, and the university research has shown that is the case all over Northern Ireland, and yet the planning system, the area planning system operated by the EA, doesn't produce the obvious integrated solution, which also saves money.
But parents will drive to the best school. Let me tell you something. If the best school for my kids was 25 miles away, I would put them in a car every morning.
Yeah, but you're extreme, Tim. You're extreme. What also came out of the survey strongly.
Michael, I live in North Belfast. At Yorkgate Station, there is school buses. Literally running kids up to BRA, and their kids going to Dominican, and they're coming in from far and wide. Because they will do it.
I know that's true, but what also came out of the survey quite strongly was that parents did put an emphasis on the convenience of the school as well, as well as the quality of education.
But where I live, there's kids being driven in from Bangor and beyond, past I don't know how many schools to get to Our Lady and St Patrick's because it's the best school. Now there's other parents who stop off at other schools en route, but that is the best Catholic grammar school for miles around, and parents will drive, even though there's other options and there's other Catholic options for them. They'll drive there because that's the best school. Parents just want the best school.
And Michael, just to go back to your thing about, I mean, and this isn't a dig at integrate. I mean, you've got Newbridge, which is an integrated school outside Banbridge and Lochbrickland. There are kids that come from miles away to get to that school because, again, parents obviously see results there, and yeah, exactly.
Like I get double the amount of applications as it has places.
I have no difficulty with that argument. That doesn't undermine integrated education. Some parents will go to enormous lengths to get their children into the school they perceive to be the best school. That's, I mean...
But it doesn't undermine integrated education.
Parents put their children through whatever the modern-day equivalent of the 11 plus is. Transfer tests all the time.
Yeah.
I personally take the view that thing should be wrapped up and finished. But I'm just saying parents will go to quite a length to give their children what they think is the best education for them. And that's fine. It doesn't undermine integrated education.
But it doesn't undermine integrated education, but what it shows is parents want quality of education. That's what this survey says. The number one factor is the quality of the education, and parents covet that more than they covet integrated status.
It tends to undermine the ordinary secondary schools as parents chase the grammar schools. And that's a class issue, and it's probably a discussion for another
Well,
day. But that's what
no,
that is.
it is. Look, as a non-grammar school boy here, who did not go to a grammar school but did go to a Catholic school, the quality of education I felt I got was incredible.
I met your former headmaster, who constantly refers to you as an example of a quality product from his school. So there you are.
There we go. Well, no, that's good. It's
Easily pleased, that headmaster.
Good to see him being talked about in dispatches. Right, we're going to move on to our next topic, and thank you. I knew that would get Michael going, that topic. But look, we'll definitely come back to academic selection. We need to come back to, and when we come later this year, when those tests are getting down, we will come back to that. So on to the next topic. Donald Trump, U.S. President Donald Trump, is continuing his tariff war against pretty much the entirety of the Western world. He has targeted the European Union, but has made comments about the pharmaceutical industry. And you might be thinking, well, why would Stormont Sources be talking about the pharmaceutical industry? It is a massive, massive employer in the Republic of Ireland. And there has been talk about the Irish economy, which has been going gangbusters, and revenues, which have been very buoyant. Even before the Apple tax deal, the Irish budget was in surplus. And there is talk about, if Donald Trump follows through on his challenges to the pharmaceutical industry, could that potentially upend the Irish economy and damage the strong budgetary situation they have down there? And also, what would be the impact up here? Because, of course, there are many people who live in Northern Ireland who now work in the Republic. So what could the impact be up here? Tim, I'll start off with you. This topic caught your eye. What was it? I mean, do you think that the challenge is real towards the Irish economy?
Well, what caught my eye is just really the noise that's coming from people in Congress. I mean, we had, 16 Republicans in Congress who have sent letters to their colleagues in the executive branch saying that, Ireland needs to be looked at. If Ireland does not pull back from passing divestment legislation, that Ireland should be put on the banned list of countries, and penalties should be imposed.
Just to jump in there, Tim. So basically, coming for the Dáil is the Occupied Territories Bill. This is obviously a bill that would obviously try to row back on any investments kind of in occupied territories. This is to do with the whole Israel-Palestine issue. Of course, Ireland was one of the first major European countries to recognise the state of Palestine last year. That's now actually being followed up by a whole host of countries like the UK, Canada, Australia. But again, this bill has caught the ire of the US administration, the Trump administration, and many European countries who are pro-Palestine are hanging back to see what happens. But it should be noted, this is actually quite a watered-down version of the Occupied Territories Bill. That's beforehand. But sorry, Tim.
This obviously came out in 2018, and it's not a full divestment bill. It's only dealing with those occupied territories, and it would deal with obviously places like Crimea as well. There being effect. It's not just targeted at Israel. It's anywhere where there's an occupied territory. But it is remarkable, I think, the noise that's starting to be created. There's this little bit of noise in the background that's starting to grow, particularly amongst Republicans. Now, it hasn't kind of reached the top yet, but we're starting to see senior Republicans. We're starting to see senior Republicans in the Senate. We're starting to see chairs of committees in the Senate. They're starting to say that Ireland is being dangerously close to being anti-Semitic. That the legislation they're seeking to pass is anti-Semitic. Now, we can debate whether this is about Israel and anti-Semitism and all of that. It's just that's what they're saying. Now, people may say, but they're wrong in saying that this isn't anti-Semitic. This is about a government that's committing genocide against people, and fair enough. We can argue about the terms, but it's undeniable that that's what they're saying. And it's just in this context of 75% of the corporation tax revenue that Ireland gets is from America. It's a direct result of American investment in Ireland now. And the American investment in Ireland is a very odd setup, because all of that 75% of tax productivity is not economic activity. It's very much American companies are moving book value into Ireland to pay tax at a lesser rate. And I think, you've got that in the background, that Ireland has been a sort of a safe haven. You've also got about 10 to 15% of jobs are directly or indirectly correlated to this 75% of money that's coming in. So I think Ireland sits in a very precarious position at the moment. Now, this has not reached the top. This is not Donald Trump saber rattling yet. But how many Republicans does it take to start sending letters? How many senior Republicans does it take to start making comments before this starts to reach the top? Because we've heard before from Donald Trump that he doesn't like this huge amount of American investment in Ireland, and he believes, all this pharmaceutical and IT investment could easily be brought back to the United States. And, even we see at the moment, Donald Trump's putting pressure on Apple. He hasn't put tariffs on mobile phones yet, and Apple have announced, an increase, a very significant increase in investment in America, and Donald Trump saying, well, that's not enough. We need all of these handsets, all of these products being built in America, and so there's a potential standoff there. And does Ireland get caught in that? As companies start to become under pressure, they see, well, we maybe need to start moving back, even though it'll cost us more in taxation. Do we need to start moving back at least some of these financial transactions? And that's all they are, financial transactions going through Ireland to attract a better tax rate. Do we need to see those starting to move back to America?
Okay. I would just note thing, because I always push back on this. There are nearly 200,000 people in Ireland employed through US firms. I appreciate there is some things, but it's not all people just throwing tax. There are actual firms that actually. 200,000 people.
And that's problematic as well, because 200,000 people are directly employed, which is about 8% of the workforce. And then indirectly employed, you've probably got another 8% of the workforce. So it's about 15-16% of the workforce. It relies on this direct and indirect taxation.
And indirect. It's about
it's
about it's well north of 300,000 people combined. Yeah, it is. Yeah, but that's real people doing real jobs. It's not. I sometimes think people think it's just like PO boxes. It's not. They're real firms and doing things. Just go to Dublin and look around at the skyline. But anyway, Michael, what do you think about this? I mean, should Ireland be? Because there is a bit of a thing. I have seen some comparisons between Ireland and New Zealand in 1985 when New Zealand banned nuclear powered ships, and that hugely annoyed the US, and New Zealand had a period of isolation in the US as a result of it. I mean, do you see any?
Tim has said it out there. I think I agree with him. I think there are these increasing rumblings in the higher echelons of the political system in the United States, alarmed and dismayed at Ireland's policy position and sort of belligerence in relation to Israel and its recognition of Palestine and so on. And I think that is probably not going to do Ireland very much good in the long run. The more immediate threat is the actual tariffs on the pharma sector. If Trump whacks a big tariff on those pharmaceutical products that are made, I mean, all the world's leaders in pharmaceuticals are down in the Cork area, Ringaskiddy around there, and they're all there. And if he whacks a big tax on them, that's going to make them less competitive, and that will put huge pressure on them to move back to the States or to ensure that future investments are to the States. It's very hard to move back quickly if you've invested, though, like $1 billion in a new manufacturing plant.
It would take years to move pharmaceuticals.
So Ireland's strategy probably in relation to all of this is to try and charm Trump and talk him out, knowing that you can count down the days till he actually his presidency ends. So I think they'll be playing a long game on this and just trying to please him and suck up to him a bit and massage his ego so that he doesn't do too much. But Tim is right. It's a period of vulnerability because it would be devastating for the Irish economy if that sector were to collapse in Ireland. Remembering, of course, however, and Ireland can make this argument, the profits from these companies are repatriated to the United States. So they're making people rich in the United States, even though they're employing a lot of people in Ireland and, of course, generating a very handsome tax take to the Irish Exchequer. And we're seeing this kind of difficulty in these structural industries. It's more visible actually now at the moment in Britain. If you take something like the car industry, where auto production in terms of units is at its lowest level in the UK since 1953, and that is just the slow seeping damage of Brexit. as investment decision after investment decision goes against Britain as plants close and are modernised. So Ireland could be facing some of that, but I think they'll be cute and they'll manage it carefully. They're also facing, I mean, there's a lot of trouble ahead potentially, because Europe hasn't forgotten that it doesn't like Ireland's 12.5% corporation tax rate either. So Ireland is very heavily dependent on corporation tax from foreign enterprises to keep the books balanced in Ireland. So there is trouble everywhere, but Ireland has managed its affairs very well in recent years, and I expect that they'll continue to deal with that threat.
Yeah. And the supreme irony of this is that Irish investment in the USA hit a peak in 2024. There are literally hundreds of Irish companies that invest in the, and it's actually this is before Trump came into office, at a record high. So that's what Micheál Martin was pointing out to Trump in the White House. Look, this is a two-way relationship. So I mean, Tim, I suppose something that we need to be cognizant of in Northern Ireland is that, you know, sometimes when the Republic sneezes, we catch the cold. Like, we often think about the property crash that hit the Republic. That hit Northern Ireland at the exact same. Northern Ireland had one of the, I don't think people realize, had one of the biggest per capita property crashes in 2008 in the UK. You know, so is there maybe a worry, do you think, in the Department for Economy that about the spillover that could maybe happen with if the Irish economy does take a hit?
Well, it's interesting you bring up the property crash, because I think. And I wish I had some data to back this up, but this is more of the feels than data. It does feel to me like there is investment that's moving from Dublin to Northern Ireland in terms of, I think a lot of the big building projects that we're seeing is investment from the south to the north, and that's what we saw at the time of the property crash. The Dublin markup topped out, and people then started to look to Belfast as a way to increase profits, and the Belfast market got massively overinflated. The Northern Ireland market as a whole, then, as a knock-on from that, got massively overinflated. And I think there is a danger, that you could see a repeat of that. And if things were to collapse down south, what does that mean then for the investment in some of these big big building projects in Northern Ireland, and where some of that private equity investment is coming from? Because undoubtedly there is a spillover on that. So yes, I think you're absolutely right. I think it'd be a massive mistake for people in Northern Ireland to be cheering on some sort of collapse in the Republic of Ireland's economy. Because if there's a collapse in the Republic of Ireland's economy, we undoubtedly will suffer from that as well. So, whilst we do have a separation because we are a little more insulated by where things are in the United Kingdom, if things start to go down south, if that makes sense, if in the Republic of Ireland things don't pan out very well economically, it's not going to pan out very well economically in the UK either. And I think, as we saw in 2007, 2008, Northern Ireland wasn't easily insulated either by the UK or what was happening down south, and we caught a very bad cold then. And so I just wouldn't be just cheerleading for a demise in the Irish economy just yet.
Yeah. And look, and we're not the only place facing. I'll give a shout out to the Curse of Politics podcast, which is kind of our equivalent in Canada. They were debating this during the week about, look, the Canadian economy is starting to now shed jobs, and they're in for tough times, and how they manage that relationship with the US as well. But it'll be interesting to see, does the Irish government stay the course on the Occupied Territories bill or not politically. I think it's the politics that are going to be very interesting to watch over the coming weeks and months.